So we've talked a little bit about presence and attunement, these two elements of developing the skills of being a part of quality interactions. So what does it mean to develop a sense of resonance and trust? Now, when we open toward and focus in an interaction, that is, when we bring presence and attunement to an interaction with another person or with a group of people, we're kind of setting the stage for resonance and trust to grow kind of naturally out of that. Resonance and trust aren't things that we inject into the interactions. They're kind of results of setting the conditions for a positive interaction. And a big part of what we've talked about so far has kind of hinted around building in a sense of empathy to feeling what's being felt by the other person. And I just wanted to make mention a couple of things about that, because it's such a wonderful human ability to develop empathy for others. And it also has kind of this rough edge where we can wear ourselves out, we can burn out with being lost in the emotions of other people if we let ourselves. And sometimes it can be easy to do. And I mentioned before that there are even specific neurons or brain cells in us that set us up to be able to feel what another's feeling. So we kind of perceive what we think the inner world of another is. And then our brains give our bodies messages to simulate what we think that might be like. Our bodies kind of run programs, so to speak, that we think the other might be feeling or running in their own bodies. And this naturally leads to behavioral imitation too. We're speaking in a resonant conversation. If you smile, I might smile with you. If you tilt your head, I might do that too. If you shift, I might shift my body's posture as well. These are signs that people are kind of synced up in how they're speaking with one another. And using our bodies as kind of detectors of what's going on in the others by, as we've talked about, using the body scanning practice of being aware of, as clearly as we can, the sensations of the body, and using that as information, as data. When we do that, we're actually picking up on what we are guessing the other might be feeling and paying attention to how it might feel if we were feeling that. And that's a beautiful, wonderful skill, to be able to use the body as a detector like that. And the difference between burnout and something that, like compassion, that helps us feel more fulfilled as we do it, seems to be that compassion has this element of being willing to do something about what we're noticing in the other person. Empathy is something like just feeling what the other's feeling, and that's it. And that's a good thing, but it also can have that burnout effect. If we feel what the other's feeling the best we can, and then we're drawn to do something about it to bring more sense of competence or peace or calm, then we're actually a part of changing the circumstances for the better. And this can prevent, or at least minimize, burnout when we put ourselves in another's shoes. And I think something worth mentioning is something that comes from the ideas of a researcher named Stephen Porges. He developed or coined this term Polyvagal Theory. And there's way too much very interesting information out there for me to sum up in a short video, but I thought it'd be interesting to describe kind of what this implies in the way we interact with students, or with anyone really. When we feel comfortable, confident, safe, secure, sense of belonging and support around a person or a given group of people, what could be said to be going on is that our nervous systems are set in what's called the social engagement system. So that is, things are going fine. There's no need for any strategies of coping or anything like that. There's no perceived threats. But when there does seem to be something triggering or upsetting or threatening going on, that social engagement system is kind of knocked offline. And the system that emerges from that is something I'm sure you're aware of, which is the fight-flight system. This means that we want to resist and power through and fight something that doesn't feel right, the circumstances that feel threatening, or we want to retreat and escape. This isn't a negative thing. This, in fact, is a pretty essential part of our survival, but it's not always appropriate in social settings. And when this happens, it can be really interesting as a practice, as an exercise, to just notice where that threshold is, where we feel comfort and ease and confidence, and when that kind of gets turned down and shut offline, and when our heart rate speeds up, when our breathing gets faster and shorter, when we start to sweat or get tight or get clammy, when we get confused and our thoughts are all over the place. The fight-flight system is basically hitting the gas pedal of our nervous system. And what I'd encourage you to try to do in interactions with students or anybody else is just notice where that threshold is for yourself. Notice when you cross over into that fight-flight system and when you feel more at ease in that social engagement system. And there's another layer of our nervous system, so to speak, at least according to Steve Porges, and that's what's typically called the dorsal vagal side of the vagal nerve, which is one of the 12 nerves out of our skull that kind of plays a part in all this. And this, fortunately, isn't a big part of most of our daily lives. This is when we feel so threatened that even the fight-flight system won't do the trick. We need to kind of pull out the last stops here. So that's when people might faint, or they, in the natural world, it's kind of like when animals play dead, you know, or when we feel sort of disconnected with our experiences, when we feel kind of dissociated in more extreme cases. But as I mentioned, fortunately, this doesn't happen very often. So something that I've mentioned before about mind wandering and how that kind of affects our sense of happiness, it has to do with a certain part of our brain called the default mode network. And this is the part of our brain that's kind of obsessed with thinking about ourselves and thinking about how others think about us. When we ruminate and constantly think about our past failures and successes, our future hopes and plans, and how we're doing now, and if we're evaluating whether we're being successful in this moment, and especially a lot of negative self-talk in our minds. This is kind of a result of this default mode network, this system of the brain that kind of stretches from back to front. And this is interesting to know about because this part of the brain is really highly differentiated from the social engagement system. It basically means that when we are stuck in our head in the negative patterns of thinking, we really can't access that comfortable, open, secure, safe sense that we have with the social engagement system. So noticing when you enter into that kind of rumination about how I'm doing and what others think about me, and finding some ways to kind of back out of that the best we can, whether that's turning to bodily sensations and kind of being anchored here using the breath or sounds or sensations deep in the body, or some other method, whatever might work for you. Finding out where that is for you can be quite helpful to try to keep yourself as regulated as possible. And as we've mentioned with attachment theory, the way that children often learn from us how to regulate themselves is to kind of borrow our more mature faculties of doing so. So when we bring that to our daily lives, we're naturally influencing how they learn to do that within themselves. And as we've talked about, it's kind of the whole point of these videos is that the way we take care of ourselves influences the way that children, adolescents learn to take care of themselves, which actually influences positively their effective schoolwork and the way that they develop in social and emotional settings. So we're taking care of the instrument of education, the instrument of interaction, which is ourselves, and really directly impacting positively the well-being of those who we're serving in our jobs. And a big part of that will inevitably be ruptures. Ruptures in attachment language means when there's no, quote, part. That is, there's no presence, attunement, resonance, or trust. And when these ruptures happen, in a relationship, in an interaction. A common habit might be to protect ourselves more and more and more. And sometimes that might be necessary in various ways, but what can be introduced very often that isn't is an invitation to repair and reconnect. Kind of challenges our pride to do so, and we often feel a lot of resistance for it. But what I'd encourage you to try, in addition to kind of noticing where that threshold is between the social engagement system and the fight-flight system within yourself, within your own experience, also notice when there's ruptures in relationships or in interactions with students. And do your best to try to invite some kind of repairing experience and reconnective experience. And that can be something that strengthens relationships, not in spite of the challenge, but actually through the challenge. You're moving through the challenge of rupture in order to repair and deepen the relationship. And a part of what this might include is what I think of as finding your voice. I mean this in a kind of literal sense. Authentically finding the tone and pitch and speed and timbre of our own voices in certain interactions can actually influence directly the nervous system of the people we're talking to. When parents use what's called prosodic speech or prosody, that kind of sing-songy, sweet, softer voice with, say, infant children, what they're actually doing, whether they know it or not, is they're using the sound of their voice, the kind of warm and open and inviting and safe sound of their voice, to directly stimulate the vagal nerve inside the infant's body, which is that 10th of the 12 cranial nerves I mentioned a moment ago. And when that vagal nerve is stimulated, it's more likely that the social engagement system will be put online, and the baby will feel safe and secure and at ease and comfortable. And so this doesn't mean we have to use baby talk, with students we work with, but trying to authentically find our own voice that lends itself toward that kind of comfort, kind of open security and safety, even if it has to be a stern message. That can be something that can be brought into the moment of rupture to invite repair and reconnection and help move the interaction from a threat to a more trusting and open opportunity for deepening connection with the person or the people you're working with.